Publisher, columnist, and blogger, Andrew Breitbart is the founder of the Breitbart network of investigative news websites, including Breitbart.com, Breitbart.tv, Big Government, Big Hollywood, Big Journalism, and Big Peace. Big Cosmos is surely on the boards.
I need to have a big synthesis and get it down to one portal.
Andrew Breitbart's new book, Righteous Indignation, Excuse Me While I Save the World. Andrew Breitbart, welcome.
Thank you.
The Liberal Grows Up, segment 1. You describe in Righteous Indignation a privileged upbringing in Southern California. Exclusive schools, very comfortable circumstances. Your parents weren't particularly political, but they were more or less conservative. And then this, I'm quoting from the book. Through some form of osmosis, I considered myself a liberal. How come?
My parents didn't fight for to maintain what it was they were teaching me through their deeds and their acts. They are a very silent generation. I grew up around with friends who had younger baby boomer parents, and they were very forthright in their politics. They would go to their rock concerts. They'd go to their Rock for Kampuchea. They'd fly to Philadelphia for Live Aid. And I remember my mother would watch Lawrence Welk on Saturday nights. The juxtaposition of...
That's not a hard choice. You want where the action was.
It was, and so as much as I loved my parents, the flow towards my friends and their parents' way of life and way of thinking was the most natural thing in the world.
Okay.
I loved my parents, but rejecting their orthodoxy was simple.
Once again, from Righteous Indignation, a turning point. You're in New Orleans, you're studying at Tulane, you're sitting down for a math exam, quote, and you're not doing well. I started to consider that maybe years of skating by, recklessly expecting everything to work out, had been exactly the wrong approach to derivatives. Nice sentence, by the way. Apparently, I realized sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes you do have to make it work out, which means that values do matter, close quote. Andrew, you're raised in a conservative family and come out a liberal. You go to what you called, I don't have experience of Tulane, but I have no reason to doubt you.
It's any humanities department USA, and I hate to do this to Tulane because I'd love to be invited back there to speak to the students, to tell them about an alternative approach.
I guarantee it lies in your future at some point. Somebody will fund a trip to Tulane. But it's a liberal, it's an American university of its time, and you come out of that a conservative. How did this happen?
Well,
you are swimming against both streams.
I was an American Studies major, and I really did think that when I chose that, that it would be reading about the Constitution, the Constitution, the Founding Fathers, Mark Twain, and sort of a benign approach towards the American experience. And I didn't realize this until afterwards, because I can say this with absolute authority. Had I not graduated, had I not been given my diploma, it would have only been me to blame. When in New Orleans, do as the New Orleanians, I really did partake in the culture down there, and I can't believe I did graduate. But there was a point where...
Mardi Gras every night for Andrew Breitbart.
It was, and it was as depressing as it was ecstatic and fun. It was a prison of decadence, and it was 4 years of nonstop where people would come and visit me from my former life in Los Angeles, and they'd leave saying it was the best time of their lives. And as they'd get on the plane to depart the Bacchanalia, I would whisper under my breath, "Please take me with you," because it was Groundhog Day. It was every single. It was the It was the Monday nights. It was the Monday nights when people would say, "Do you want to go out?" And I said, "Nah, I think I'm going to stay in and study." And then 15 minutes later, I'd go out and I'd meet them. So I really didn't. I didn't dedicate myself to academia, and it was only after I graduated when I got a letter or an email, I don't remember the exact year, I think it was around 1994, asking me to assess my degree. You know, it was
self-assessment or
an assessment of it, and I started to look through the books, wondering what was that. What was that education? And what I remember was, to synthesize it, I've watched C-SPAN my entire life, and I remember I've watched Noam Chomsky talk in this strange jargon that is not accessible to the average person. And I remember thinking to myself, there was a period there in my American Studies class where I was hearing the word deconstruction and semiotics a bit too many times. And I'm like, what's going on here? What is this language? What are they trying to do? And I started to analyze the courses that I took, and I realized that it was cultural Marxist theory. I'm like, this is kind of strange. I thought that this was supposed to be American studies, not German, Italian, nihilistic theory.
So in a way, it's just as well that you were debauched all 4 years.
That's the whole point of that chapter, is that I think alcohol saved me.
You go, I don't want my own college-age children to hear that line. I'll edit that line out from the version they see. After Tulane, you go back to Los Angeles and scrape around. You end up waiting table, you get a job as a courier at a production company, and an important moment comes when you know the man who will become your father-in-law, the comedian and actor Orson Bean, known to people of a certain generation from To Tell the Truth, known to people of another generation from Desperate Housewives. And here, I'll just quote to you from Righteous Indignation. One day I asked Orson why he had Rush Limbaugh's book, The Way Things Ought to Be, on his shelf. I was convinced to the core of my being that Rush Limbaugh was a Nazi, anti-black, anti-Jewish, and anti-all things decent. Orson simply suggested that I listen to him again. And what happened when you did?
Well, it was the 1992 election cycle, and at that point I thought I was a liberal, and I started listening to Rush simply because my alternative radio station had turned into a grunge rock festival. I loathed Kurt Cobain and Eddie Vedder so much that I switched to the AM dial out of desperation. And so that's really, I have to thank grunge music for turning me into a conservative. And I remember the first month or two thinking, well, I may not agree with his politics, but at no point have I heard him intimate anything that appears to be racist, sexist, or homophobic. And I started to ask people around me, have you ever listened to this Rush Limbaugh creature? And they said, yes, he's a racist, sexist, and a homophobe. I said, okay, I need some help here, because I've been listening now for months as I'm driving on LA freeways delivering scripts. He's not. He's not. And what I realized is I believed to the core of my being that I had listened to him. If you had given me a lie detector test, I promise you I would have passed, because with conviction, the culture, the 60 Minutes report on him, all of the things that I had been told reflected that negative stereotype. But I, in fact, had never assessed him myself, and recognizing that the mainstream media doesn't necessarily tell you the truth, or tells you the truth from its ideological standpoint, became this panacea for me, where I started to challenge the mainstream media.
Segment 2, the Democrat media complex, again from Righteous Indignation. Limbaugh, like the professor I always wanted but never had, created a vivid mental picture of the architecture of a world that I resided in but couldn't see completely, the Democrat media complex. Describe the architecture.
Well, it's the Matrix. I mean, it really, for me, it was, if you've ever been to Coney Island and you see those holograms where there's a picture of the Empire State Building and you're supposed to squint, and you squint and you squint and you can't see it, but eventually you see the Eiffel Tower. And you're like, and then once you see the Eiffel Tower, you can't not see the Eiffel Tower. And through every day, Rush Limbaugh analyzing the source material of the world, the New York Times, the Washington Post, CNN, ABC, CBS, and NBC, he was able to create for me a very vivid picture that the people who were allegedly objective and neutral reporters and journalists were the front line of the political battle. And they used their objectivity as their greatest weapon, because they were telling young, impressionable people like me who believed in Woodward and Bernstein and who believed in Walter Cronkite. Wait a second, you're telling me that perhaps ideology played a role in how they interpreted stories, or how they chose one story over the other? And so then the Matrix, or the Democrat media complex, became everything to me. In fact, when discussing politics, I always turn it back to the complex. It's always about seeing the world and hoping that people see the Eiffel Tower.
So this is, you're listening to Limbaugh in 92 during that election cycle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you remain, what I'm getting at here is, who is the Democrat media complex then? And who is the Democrat media complex now? What's changed? What's changed?
Other than much has changed, actually, and that's the new media, and that's the whole point of this entire book.
Right.
Is that Rush took the moribund AM dial, and at the end of the day was a media critic, but he was a relentless media critic, and he was exposing to. He wasn't just working with ditto heads. If ditto heads were what Rush Limbaugh were about, they could care less about. Just let him be and talk to the yokels out there in the hinterlands. They're worried about Andrew Breitbarts of the world, people that would actually listen to what he has to say and awaken people so that they can see that these people are using the media as a way to reinforce a herd mentality within the culture. And so what I see now is they used to get away with it. Rush Limbaugh took the moribund AM dial, and now it's a flourishing realm where countless people, from Michael Medved to Dennis Prager to Sean Hannity, are showing people or granting people a perspective or the alternative reality from the mainstream media. And Matt Drudge comes along in 1995, and he tells people, hey, look, you don't need to have an AM radio station, which costs a lot of money, and you have to have a certain skill set. He said, look, if you have a modem and a computer, you can enter this thing. We're now 20 plus years into this new media revolution, and the difference is there is open media warfare now between Katie Couric and the Rush Limbaughs and the Matt Drudges of the world. We are a polarized nation. This is a civil war based upon communication.
Okay, so let me take... Here, again, quoting from Righteous Indignation, I, Andrew Breitbart, I'm at war with the mainstream media. I'm at war with the mainstream media because they portray themselves as objective observers of reality when they're hacks who think they can destroy everything America stands for. But shouldn't you relax? Things are working out. Things are working out. There's Fox News, there's Rush Limbaugh, there are all kinds of alternative...
That's not enough. This is what angers me so about the...
That's what I want to know. Why aren't you more relaxed? We're 20 years into it, just as you said. Why don't you say, okay, I'll take a... I'm going to spend half my time on the beach in Santa Monica.
Because AM radio, an op-ed column, and Fox News is not enough. The big...
What do you want? What do you want?
I want a center-right nation to fight for its soul, and its soul is represented in the arts. Its soul is represented in a world in which media is everything. AM radio is the lowest form of communication. It's tinny. It's not robust. It's not Avatar. I want Avatar. I want the right to enter the world of media to the extent and invest in media the way that the left does. George Soros is throwing money like crazy.
You want an NPR?
I want everything. I want us. Right. They have an NPR. They're so slick in understanding how important media is. They've convinced the government to pay them to propagate their worldview. How come we're not fighting for money to propagate our worldview? Because we don't believe in it. Okay, then use the free market to convey the same ideas with the same level of sophistication and excellence that NPR does, because they are superior at what they do, just as Jon Stewart is superior at what he does. I grant Hollywood and the experts in propaganda for what they do.
You admit that they're good. In fact, that's what annoys you.
That it annoys me, and it annoys that our side does not commit to this battle.
All right. Segment 3. Let's go through the background of your life here in fighting this fight that you've just described. Righteous Indignation. I intentionally co-created, this is a little tricky problem here for you, Andrew. I intentionally co-created the Huffington Post. I, Andrew Breitbart, intentionally co-created the Huffington Post in order to grant the hard left a place in the blogosphere to express itself. Okay, explain yourself.
I had been Arianna Huffington's researcher up until the point where she converted on a dime. One day
You knew Arianna when she was still conservative.
Oh, absolutely. She dug up Larry Lawrence from Arlington National Cemetery. Thank you, Arianna.
Larry Lawrence was ambassador.
Ambassador from Switzerland, Clinton's #1 donor, and he granted him a waiver to be in Arlington National Cemetery. He had never even been in the Merchant Marines.
Right.
So she had her credentials.
She got that scandal.
That's right. And I enjoyed being with her when she was a conservative, but I walked out the door when she switched to the left. She came to me 5 years later, 5 years of awkward air kissing at parties that we would run into each other. She came to me after the 2004 election cycle and said, "Do you have any ideas for a website?" And she had a money guy, and we came up with the plan, and it was to create this place where if we could get your friends who you couldn't afford to write for you for free, it would be exceptionally helpful to you. You'll be the queen of the left-wing blogosphere. I said, but from my standpoint, right now, if you want to hear what the actual left has to say, not Katie Couric pretending to be neutral, what the left has to say, all there is on the internet in 2004 is the Daily Kos, where a Peter Robinson could write an op-ed, Bush is the equivalent to Hitler, under a pseudonym, 2 Live Crew 333378. And that constituted a transparency within the media, where, well, an opaqueness, where these people could write these things. And Koss himself was being put on Meet the Press. And so I said, Ariana, you can become the salon that you have at your house, you can put online. And it worked. But the idea was, and I said this to any number of brand name people that I have in my life from the radio, this is going to be crazy, because I've gone to Young America's Foundation, events, and I've talked to these kids, and they know me to be the real deal. I mean what I say, and I say what I mean, and I'm conservative. But I think this is going to be helpful for conservatives, because it will be source material. And the first day that it launched, and I was worried about
it being Huffington Post.
The Huffington Post
Right,
launched.
right.
I was driving up Lincoln Boulevard, worried, because I was getting emails from people saying, "How could you do this?" And I listened to Michael Medved on the first day that it launched, reading aloud Rob Reiner's first day post. Where are the Woodwards and Bernsteins of today to take on George Bush? And he was howling, and I was howling in the car, and I was tearing up, just thinking, this meathead guy who wants to add a dollar, to every cigarette pack to pay for lettuce patches or something. This incoherent guy proved my point, and I left within a month, and I remember one point. This is my favorite moment. During Katrina, Randall Robinson at the Huffington Post wrote an article 2 days into the flooding that black people were cannibalizing each other in New Orleans. And Drudge put it up, a link at the Drudge Report, and within 24 hours, Ariana called me up and she said, "You won." I said, "What do you mean you won?" She goes, "We retracted the story." So this was, I swear, I'm a mischievous guy. I to a great extent, I was more inspired.
Okay, Andrew, 20 years or whatever it's been, 15 years later, who's winning in the internet? You've got Ariana just sold the Huffington Post. She's continuing to operate it from AOL, MoveOn.org, Daily. These are still big.
Yeah.
You've got your enormous number, So who's winning?
Well, I think that
Has it skewed conservative and libertarian? Has it been what you hoped?
I think, look, the media is still left of center, and they're trying to buffer up their waning enterprise, their waning monopoly, by giving $315 million to Ariana Huffington. Is AOL coming to me saying, "Wow, you've got this audience of the center right"? It wouldn't dawn on them, because it is the war that I've described. Who's winning? Well, monetarily, they still are controlling the majority of the pieces. But
so there's still something second class, second rate about the conservative.
Of course, but what we are winning tactically, because Hannah Giles and James O'Keefe took down Acorn with a high quality video series that cost less than $1,400, which sends a message to the average kid out there that if ABC, CBS, and NBC are not going to cover things and act as a checks and balance against progressive organizations, against the AFL-CIO, against the SEIU, ACORN, other community organizing groups, then we can do it ourselves. And we're having an effect going around the Democrat media complex, over it, or right straight forward. And my business model is to aim every one of our exposés straight at the mainstream media and say, Katie Couric, you are being dared not to cover this.
All right. Segment 4, the theory, of which you have more in this book than I'd expected. Righteous indignation. A lot gets explained here. Marx and Hegel had paved the way for the progressives, who in turn had paved the way for the Frankfurt School, who had then attacked the American way of life by pushing cultural Marxism through critical theory. There's a lot going on there. Very briefly, what's the Frankfurt School, and why should anyone watching this interview care?
Okay, first of all, anyone that reads this book is going to laugh, and they're going to cry, and they're going to get Andrew in all of his zany, different, multiple layers. But there's one chapter that is like putting the medicine in the sherbet in order to get your kid to take it, in order to get rid of his fever. And to me, my one discovery, my one great epiphany, my one aha moment that I said, I got it. I see what exactly happened with in this country. The Frankfurt School were emigres from
Germany, Austria.
Germany.
Mm-hmm.
It was the equivalent of this, the Hoover Institution. What the Hoover Institution is to Stanford University. The Frankfurt School was a think tank at the University of Frankfurt, and they were social scientists like Herbert Marcuse, Antonio Gramsci, Horkheimer, Adorno. These were all a bunch of guys in the middle of World War II who had suffered in Europe, 2 world wars in a row, and they had been fighting. They had been fighting the Nazis, and they were trying to figure out another aspect of how to how to spread Marxism around the world. You could go to Bolivia, you could go to Bulgaria, and you could go to the peasant class, and you could say, let's flip this place. The Marxist-Stallman argument of getting the workers to get upset at the owners was very easy, but not in America, where the middle class was invested in their productivity, invested in the concept that they could have their own small little American dream, a white picket fence, that they could invent something and go from one generation to being dirt poor to being an owner within a very quick period of time. And what these guys figured out when they came to the United States, and Adorno is the one that drives me the most crazy. He came out to California, and I think it was Bertolt Brecht, the East German playwright, moved to Santa Monica in the 1940s at the height of the Golden Age. Think about this. These guys left Nazi Germany and Mussolini's Italy to come to California in the 1940s, and they lived by the beach, and they were depressed by the relentless cheeriness, the productivity, and the capitalism that they witnessed around them. And they came up with at the end of the day, we could call it cultural Marxism, but at the end of the day, we experience it on a day-to-day basis. And by that I mean a minute-by-minute, second-by-second basis. It's political correctness and it's multiculturalism. And what it took was this amazing concept of e pluribus unum, where everybody comes here and contributes to this, everybody becomes an American and contributes, but we have a common culture, we have a common border, a common mindset. What they did was take the haves versus have-nots friction and translated it into oppressor versus the oppressed. And
this got taken up by faculties across the country.
That's
the point of the Frankfurt School and the progressivism. It becomes embraced by 60s
post-structuralism
academics.
Post-structuralism, queer studies, African American studies, all of that is pitting people against each other. It is anti-American to its core.
If Marcuse was I'm quoting again from Righteous Indignation, if Marcuse was the Jesus of the New Left, then Saul Alinsky was his St. Paul. Again, let me just put it to you in simple terms. Who's Saul Alinsky, and why should anyone watching this interview care?
Well, Hillary Clinton wrote her senior thesis on Saul Alinsky at Wellesley. Barack Obama is an acolyte of Saul Alinsky. He created the concept of community organizing, and what he did, as I argue in this book, is he took all of this ethereal claptrap, this Noam Chomsky-like jargon that the average person couldn't understand.
Herbert Marcuse is very hard to read.
Right, it's all impossible to read. But he was able to translate this cultural Marxist down to a series of rules and a mindset, a warrior mindset, where the critical theory was like, take on your enemy, take him directly on, destroy that person. He applied critical theory down to the street war level. And I would argue that the Katie Courics of the world, the Chris Matthews of the world, Rachel Maddow, and Keith Olbermann, unbeknownst even to themselves, are studied in the tactics of Alinsky.
Segment 5, the Breitbart Pragmatic Primer for Realistic Revolutionaries. Righteous Indignation. My transformation from empty-headed, hard to believe you were ever empty-headed, but we'll let you get away with that. My transformation from empty-headed, pop culture-infused, talking points parroting liberal to new media warrior took me 4 decades. But those years in the wilderness taught me some basic rules that I've applied steadily and steadfastly and that are bearing tremendous results, close quote. So you then present your own rules to answer Saul Alinsky's rules. Don't be afraid to go into enemy territory. What do you mean by that?
I can't tell you how many people tell me, don't go on to the Bill Maher show.
Take it right to them.
Oh, it's the best. And first of all, I've had my greatest successes because I live in West Los Angeles. My life is taking it to them. I live in West Los Angeles. I live amid, the Hollywood rubble. And when I do a Bill Maher show and I go to Starbucks the next morning and the barista says, I saw you on TV last night and I didn't like how the audience was booing you before you finished your sentences. And I thought that you made an interesting point. Nobody sought me out to reclaim me on behalf of my parents, not even my parents. I tripped upon conservatism. My goal is to go out there and find someone else like me who'd never even known what conservatism was and say, hey, maybe I can draw you in. I try and do it through mirth and humor a lot of the times, and in addition to the investigative stuff that I do. I mean, when I say confront these people head on, I went down to the anti-Coke rally on rollerblades and a camera to get them to...
That was your stuff? That was your film?
Well, the Christian Hartsock was there and I was there, and we both captured unbelievable, pro-violence rhetoric. Let's string up Clarence Thomas, what these progressives had to say. Just terrible, terrible stuff.
Be open about your secrets. Be open about your secrets. That's one of your rules. What do you mean?
They're going to... I talk about how I drank a lot in college. It's not a huge revelation. I don't think I drank more than the average person that was in New Orleans at the time. But I always wake up at night thinking that the Alinskyites, the Sid Blumenthals of the world, the Fenton Communications of the world, the Media Matters of the world, the John Podestas of the world are going to find what your Achilles heel is, and they're going to exploit it. And so why not throw it out there? Barack Obama did exactly that when he wrote in one of his books that he used coke, that he experimented with drugs. You have to do that because they're going to find it. If you own it and you talk about what you learned from that experience, or you show that you're human and not try to pretend to be a perfect public, entity, I think that you're going to fare a zillion times better.
Ubiquity is key. What do you mean?
Oh, with the Acorn thing, this was a rare opportunity. James and Hannah come to me with this.
James and Hannah, two just out of college, weren't they?
Well, yeah, James is 25, Hannah was 20
right.
at the time, so she had not completed college.
And they'd gone and they'd gotten on tape Acorn. Go ahead, tell the story. Tell it briefly, though.
They posed as a pimp and a prostitute, trying to start using government funds in many cases through and to get tips on how to avoid paying taxes from Acorn, Obama's vaunted community organizing
so you go down
group.
To the community organizers, Acorn, and get all this stuff on tape.
Yeah, in every office except for one, it was serviced with a smile, and they knew that they couldn't go to ABC, CBS, or NBC. In fact, I actually went to ABC.
Acorn gets government money, right?
They get government money. I knew that this was almost violently important information. That, oh my gosh, it was sort of like back when Drudge did the Lewinsky thing. This is going to cause heads to roll. This is going to be a big deal. How do I get this out there? I guarantee you, even in 2011, my putting that out there at biggovernment.com alone and hoping that it goes viral would not have been the successful strategy. They would have sicked their lawyers, the DNC, Acorn, I don't even know,
Okay.
Kirkland and Ellis. They would have
fought back.
They would have
shut you
fought
down.
back and
Right.
shut it down. The
Okay.
goal was to try and make sure that as many people got their were vested in showing this. One thing I found about the conservative movement is there are a lot of people who are hyper competitive. People that you would think that would be friends with each other.
They believe in competition.
They believe in competition and they fight. So, well, let's, you can, if you're going to let so-and-so over at that station have an access to that video, then we're not going to put it on our station. And I was like, okay, you guys, this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to show a story that the mainstream doesn't want you to see. And ubiquity is what made Acorn go down, not that it was on a blog site.
You've got more rules, but our time is limited. Final question. What do you mean in your pragmatic primer for realistic revolutionaries in righteous indignation by believe in the audacity of hope?
Well, my business partner hates this about me because every now and then I will compare myself to Don Quixote because he doesn't like the
tilting at windmills.
Yeah, that's right. But
right.
I do believe that many of the things that I've accomplished have such as taking on the complex. What most of AM talk radio does simply criticizes it from afar. When I saw what they did to Clarence Thomas, and you juxtapose what they did to Clarence Thomas next to anointing Bill Clinton for exhibiting the same behavior that they claimed that Thomas was guilty of. When you see how they treat the Tea Party, they're default racist. They have to disprove their racism. I believe that the natural organism that is the Democrat media complex behaves oftentimes in an evil fashion. My goal is to destroy the mainstream media as we currently know it so that it is more equitable, so that it is more fair. It seems like an outrageous goal. I'm not sure that there's a business model that's going to make it so that I'm going to have Rupert Murdoch-like money, but I hope that my children's generation exists in a more fair and equitable media. And the first thing that we're going to have to get rid of is this fake declaration of objectivity and neutrality. That is a big lie. We need to move towards something that is a more mature version of what we have now, more like the UK. In Britain, the newspapers are avowedly left and right.
You know what you're getting.
And they're mature about it. We are just going through the adolescent phase of recognizing that objectivity was the big lie of the latter part of the 20th century.
Andrew, we have to close because you have to get in a car and drive up to Marin County for an event promoting righteous indignation.
I told you.
Following your own first rule, don't be afraid to go into enemy territory. Andrew,
told you.
Andrew Breitbart, author of Righteous Indignation, thank you.
Thank you.
For Uncommon Knowledge, I'm Peter Robinson. Thank